All right. Thanks for being here. Marysol James. I'd messed that up. Marysol? Would you say Marysol or Marisol? Marysol. Okay. James.
Marysol.
Writer, traveler, human. How do you set up your backpack when you do one bag travel?
Well, this was a little while ago, but it was the smallest backpack I've ever had in my life. But I was mostly backpacking through Asia. So when you go places like India or Bangladesh or Thailand or Vietnam, you really only need what you're wearing. You have one set of clothes, and then you have a change of clothes in the backpack. And that's all you bring. That's it. So you're basically washing your clothes every night and then swapping them out day after day. So that's it. It's one backpack and it's not that hard.
We recently went to South America to go to um, Peru and the Galapagos, and there were some restrictions on the smaller planes that you could only have one bag, and it had to be less than 15 kilos, so a little less than 20 pounds. And
Mm-hmm.
it was interesting figuring out what you were going to take and what you weren't, just in case you didn't know what you were going to need. And then
Yep.
being in the mountains and then being at the beach, you had to have some sort of jacket, but you didn't want it to take up so much space. It was a interesting way to travel. I prefer the one bag travel over checking bags and then having to wait to get them and carrying them around and all that. But
Mm-hmm. Well,
travel,
also I was in my 20s and 30s, so I really didn't care about. I was really, really a budget traveler. I mean, really, there was nothing fancy about it. There were no frills. I would bring, I bought these little travel size shampoo or whatever. I used the shampoo as a facial wash. I used it as a body wash. When it ran out, I went to some local market in Vietnam and I bought whatever they used and just, carried on like that, just discarding as I went. So when I went back to my base, at that time was Hong Kong, it was very easy. I left with less than or I arrived back home with less than I left with because I had used up all the toiletries. And whatever I didn't use, I just left there. I just left behind in the hostel for whoever wanted a shampoo. So
yeah.
no, it's a really great way to travel, and I really enjoyed it. I don't know if I could do it now. I'm a bit more high maintenance now that I'm 52, but I think if I tried, I think I'd get back into it pretty quickly because it was a great way to travel. You don't realize how little you need until you travel with little.
Yep. It's like if you, even at home, you can just see the stuff you use daily versus all the stuff you have. It's one of the best parts of the military was when you had things, it had to fit in a sea bag and that was it. That's all you had. So it, I appreciated it at the time. I think I appreciate it more now. There were some
Mm,
annoying things you had to carry, like all your uniforms and everything for inspection. So that was aggravating because it
mm.
took up a lot of space. But besides that, you didn't have a lot of things to worry about.
How long were you in the military for?
I was just in the reserves for a
Mm,
6x2 contract for six active reserve, two inactive.
hmm.
So yeah, it's
Yeah,
good.
but
Not what I thought
the
it was going to be,
trainings
but I'm glad I did it.
but the training sticks, doesn't it? Some stuff kind of sticks a little bit.
Yeah, it's good.
Hmm.
I know how to make a bed.
I bet you do. Iron a shirt in under a minute.
Yeah, yeah. They have a lot of things you don't have to iron anymore. So I missed out on
Oh,
that part of it. Like we had the
oh,
boots
okay.
that you had to polish and the uniforms you had to starch and press. So hmm, the new uniforms a little better, I think.
Upward progress.
So then with all the traveling, did you use a lot of what you learned and experienced in that in your writing?
You would think I would, and I think I have, but only in the sense that I've always wanted to be a writer for as long as I can remember. Ever since I was a kid, I wanted to be a writer. And one of the great things about wanting to be a writer is you have to be a reader. I don't think you can do one without the other. I don't think it's possible. And so when I was reading, I had a really vivid imagination. I could picture the places, all places I'd never been, and people I was never going to meet. And then when I traveled, it was like suddenly all of that love for stories and human stories and different cultures and different experiences and all of that just really came to the fore. And I realized that when I was writing about my travels, I wrote a series of short stories, and those were very influenced by my travels. But my more recent writing, which is romance, my original short stories were contemporary literature, actually quite dark. But my romance has probably where my travels reflect are, again, that deep love of just storytelling and humanity that really took hold when I was traveling. That whole idea that I could go to, I could go to Cambodia and have something in common with a mother in Cambodia or something in common with a student in Cambodia just really, really reinforced my belief that there are human stories. And I really try to reflect that even in my romance, where people think, oh, it's romance, there is no story, there's no plot, no character development. It's just not true. Romance is the landscape for really human stories. And I think that's really, I think that's something I really love about writing. And it's something I love about traveling. So that's the connection for me between those two worlds.
Yeah, the interpersonal relationships is whether you're writing a space crime drama or a romance or whatever, it's all that the humans are the ones that are reading it. So that's the ones you have to relate to. And
Mhm.
yeah,
And
it is interesting.
your characters have to make sense. You can't just write sort of one-dimensional just because he's hot doesn't mean people are gonna care about him or root for him. He has to have a personality, he has to have a backstory, he has to have strengths, weaknesses. He has to be somebody that you care about, and the same thing with my female characters. If it's just a bunch of cookie cutter things that you're just putting together to have sex, nobody's going to invest in the story. So without the humanity, there is nothing to recommend. There is no story. It's just AI might as well write it. A bot might as well write it. That's about as much emotion as you're going to actually see. If you're going to write a romance, it better be emotional, one way or the other.
Hmm. No emotion in the writer, no emotion in the reader. I think that was
Mm.
Thoreau or Hawthorne. I don't know. So, what do you see the difference between romance writing and other types of writing? Is it all the same? It just depends on what part of it has the volume turned up on it, like it's
Yeah.
the relationship part.
I think that's a really great way to look at it. And it's because, like I said, I wrote a collection of short stories that weren't romantic. They were romantic in that there were relationships in them, but there was no sex. There was nothing explicit. And then I wrote two full length novels. But again, no romance. Well, romance, but not no sex, nothing gratuitous or explicit or anything like that, but really solid storytelling. And I think I'm actually really glad that I started that way with short stories where you have to put a whole lot of storytelling in just a few pages. It's very compact. So you really have to pack emotion into a very limited space. So I learned how to do that. And then with my longer books, I really got to explore plot, pacing, tone, character development. And I really developed a real respect and appreciation for that. So then when I got into romance writing, completely by accident, not a plan at all, one thing that I brought into it was a real background in strong character writing. So when it came time to write a sex scene, that would be something that would be new for me. I would have never done that before. And I found the first 3 or 4 sex scenes really hard to write. It felt really difficult for me. I needed a glass of wine before I could
Mm.
write my first sex scene because it felt so intimate, like I was in somebody's bedroom and I shouldn't be there. So for me, that was the only difference between any kind of writing I'd done before and romance was I needed to include um, really kind of steamy sex that my readers would think made sense in the context of the bigger story. You couldn't just slam a sex scene in there. It had to be a natural progression of the relationship as it went along. So for me, that would be that's the only difference in the kind of writing I was doing before and now is my romance has sex scenes in it. Not all romance has to. There is clean romance, but I don't write that. I write quite dirty romance.
Is there a line then? I guess it's all on a spectrum if things are on spectrums from
Mhm.
just storytelling, love story to romance with sex to erotica. Is that
Yeah.
I would think that the short story writing definitely helped because it does teach you to make people care quickly about something. And if it's
Yeah.
about a topic or about a person, then certainly that's easier if you're trying to make them care about someone in a romance, which I think you would not just want them to
Mhm.
care about it, but to a certain point, put themselves in the position or to fall in love with the character themselves.
Yes, exactly. And it's interesting because you're right. There is, a sliding scale of these things where I read I've stopped reading my reviews on Amazon, but in the beginning, I was quite insecure about what I was doing. So I was reading my reviews to think, okay, what do people like? What do people hate? What can I do differently? And then I stopped reading them because on the one hand, I would have a reader say something like, "Oh, I really loved the story. I fell in love with the characters, but the sex scenes, they were pretty mild. Like they were spicy, but they weren't like over the top." And then I would read a review that somebody would say something like, I threw the book out the window. I didn't even finish it because it was just filthy. The sex scenes were like pornography and they were so over the top. And I'm thinking, well, which is it? So
Mm.
it's about the reader's tolerance to it. Some of my readers skips my sex scenes because they find them too much. They're just there for the story. Whereas other of my readers say, yeah, I've read much like hotter, like, yeah, don't worry, your stuff is not that dirty. So again, I think it's about what the reader considers to be romance versus erotica versus porn versus titillating versus spicy versus mild, like whatever. This didn't do a thing for me. So that's a hard one to say where the lines are. I think it comes down to the reader more than the writer, in my experience.
I agree. I wonder if they have a general scale, like you have the scale of what makes a novel, what makes it a novella, what's a short story, all that, like the general understanding of it. And even then, you can find vast differences in those. But I wonder if they have a romance scale to where a
Hmm.
reader could look at it and go, this is what I like. This is what I think is too much. But if you can
Hmm.
skip through the scenes, I call that the nevertheless moments where if you have a book and you're writing just about a more technical side of something like sailing, people that like sailing will like that paragraph or page about sailing, but don't make it 20 pages about sailing because you're going to lose people
Gotcha.
that don't worry about it. So you have to have that page that is engaging. Maybe you teach somebody a little something, but they can look at it, and if they don't understand it, they say, "Nevertheless, I will continue on with the story."
It's interesting because Amazon, where I self publish on Amazon exclusively, they have categories, and there's romance, and then there's erotica, and erotica is separate. And in the early days, I wasn't sure where I fell, because as you say, I'm thinking, well, what is romance? What is erotica? Some of the language in my sex scenes is quite graphic. Does that tip it over into the erotica side? But there's so much storytelling. There's, out of 280 pages, maybe 40 pages are sex scenes spread over three sex scenes. So is that, and it seems that the tipping point, as I refer to it, is what percentage of the book is descriptive graphic sex scenes. And if it's the majority of the book, that seems to be erotica because it really is. If your book is 60% sex scenes and only 40% story, plot, character, or whatever, it's not really a romance. It's something else. It's something more. So I think that that's the scale, if we want to call it that. It's kind of how much of your book is spent introducing characters, relationships, situations, conversations, and how much is, in the bedroom. And that seems to be where it just seems to come down to a percentage or a numbers game more than anything else. So if that's the scale, then my books are firmly romance, although the sex scenes might be considered erotica, I suppose, by some people.
That makes sense to have it explained that way. I wonder if you look at a romance book from 20 to 40 years ago, how much different it is from a romance book now. Just thinking about movies and how they rate
Mhm.
those, and you look at a horror movie from the 70s and a horror movie now, that's really different. But one might be, nowadays, a rated R movie might have been not allowed 40 or 50 years ago.
I agree. I mean, my son is 17. He'll be 18 next month. And he and I go to the cinema quite a bit because he's studying film. And we see a lot of different films. And I look at the ratings at the beginning of the film, and it all seems to be sort of if you're younger than 15, you need parental guidance. But if you're over 15, you're fine to come on your own. There is no way that if I were 15, my parent like, there's no way that would have been a 15 and over movie. That a lot of these movies we would consider, I think, rated R, like 18
Yeah.
and above. But so I don't know if it's that the demographic is getting smarter, like kids are so used to these things and they're less sensitive to these things than I was at that age. But I look at some of this stuff and I think, no way if I were 15 I could handle this. But I mean, I was 15, I was born in 1972. So, my 15 my 15-year-old world was not my son's 15-year-old world at all. So maybe there is a big difference just in, again, it's like the reader, their ability to handle the sex comes down to what their personal tolerance. I think maybe kids today just have a different tolerance than I did at the same age.
Yeah, that has to change wildly over time because you think 1,000 years ago, a 15-year-old is maybe a lot tougher than a 15-year-old these days. And when we were 15, maybe we were a lot more sheltered than either one of those. So
Yeah.
it's strange the zeitgeist of the time and morality and
Mm,
debauchery and how it changes and violence and all that. But
mhm.
hmm, maybe because we were so sheltered when we were in our teens is why the world is in the condition it is in now. I don't know.
Like, I would suspect that none of us saw it coming, and if somebody had tried to warn us, I doubt very much we would have believed it. But here we are. Here we are now,
But
and I don't envy my 2 sons. My one son is 50 and the other one will be 18. I sort of don't envy them this world they have to navigate because, if I had a hard time at school, I could go home and that was the end of it. I mean, until the next day. But with the kids today, if they're having a hard time at school, it just follows them through their phone into the home. There is no quiet place for them anymore. As long as they're on social media, um, it'll be noise in their head. And I can't imagine having to navigate that as a young person today. I don't think I would want to do it, but they're doing it somehow.
yes, life will find a way.
Mhm,
What is your writing area like? Like when you do your writing,
mhm.
how often do you and what's your atmosphere around you that you're looking for when you're writing?
Well, I'm sitting in my writing area right now. I know you can't see it, but I'm sitting at a really large IKEA desk, like a huge one of those stand-up ones.
Okay.
And I've got photos around me. I've got a Buddha head from my travels. I've got two sculptures I picked up in China. I've got a whole lot of notebooks over there for just scribbling down my ideas. Um, I've got books to my right, kind of inspiring books. And I just have a huge bookshelf to my left, massive. It's like a cabinet. And then over here, I've got my Chinese cabinets with paintings, more Buddha heads. So I'm kind of surrounded by my travels and by photos and books and quite a lot. You can see the light behind me that's coming in. There's a door, that the door leads right out onto the street. So this is my writing area, and I love it because no matter where I look in this room, I see um, something that reminds me of my travels, my family, my friends, books, anything to do with writing, anything to do with creativity. And I will come down here first thing in the morning because I live upstairs, obviously. This is my home. So I'll come straight downstairs and get on the laptop and get a coffee and check my emails and then get myself ready. And I always get dressed up for work. Even though I'm working at home, I put on lipstick, high heels, like a blouse, dress pants, a dress, skirts, whatever, high heeled boots, nail polish, jewelry, because I treat it like a job. I take it very seriously. So when I'm sitting at this desk, I'm at work. So I'll start to write or do research or something like that at about 9 o'clock in the morning, and I'll work on it pretty solidly until about 2, and then I'll stop for something to eat. And then the afternoon tends to be more for things like this, or putting a video on YouTube, or doing some social media, or sending out some query emails, or doing podcasts, or sending out podcast queries, more admin kind of stuff or
Mm.
promotional kind of stuff. So the majority of my day is spent writing, researching, scribbling down ideas, as they come to me. And then part of my day is always set aside for promotion because the thing is, being self published, you have to self promote. And that's quite an important part of it because it's great if you write a book, but if nobody knows you're alive, then nobody's going to buy it. So that's how my days tend to be structured.
How do you organize when you're writing? Like, do you use
Mhm.
timelines or notepads or just in a computer? What's
Mm.
your way of doing that?
Well, I'm in the middle of writing another book, and the entire plot is in this little notebook. I've written it out by hand. Then, what I do when I'm happy with it is I have a program on my computer called Milanote, which I've only recently discovered about 8 months ago, I suppose. And I love Milanote because it's a place where you put all your research on it, and you can literally click links. It will take you where you want to go. If you have an idea in your head for how you want a character to look, you can find a photo and stick it in the notes of the characters. Every character has their own page that you can click on, and every fact about that character comes up. And then the plot itself, where you click on outline and the whole thing comes up as boxes, as individual chapters with connections between them. So it's a really visual way for me to see my book in one place on one screen. But I always start with the notebook. I always write by hand first. That's how I think best. And then once I'm sure I like what I've got, I put it on the laptop. And then from there, that's when I'll start to write.
When you're working on a new book, do you have a certain amount of time that you're letting it grow in your
Percolate.
mind, the story? Yeah.
Percolate. Exactly. Yes. The thing is, though, I write series. So right now I have 31 books spread over 6 series. So when I start a series, the first book is the one that always takes the absolute longest because in the first book, I tend to introduce, if not all, the characters that we'll see over the entire series. I introduce about 75% of them. So that first book for me is so important because I have to set kind of the tone of the series because every one of my series has a different tone, a different landscape, different groups of people with different backgrounds. So that's really important. But even more importantly, in the first book, I have to introduce the thread. which I have to carry through the entire series. So, the first book is the one that really takes a while for me. And once I feel like in my head I'm really clear who these people are, what they look like, how they interact, where they hang out, what do they talk about, what are their relationships, what are their backgrounds, how did all these people meet, how am I going to bring all these people into each other's lives in a romantic way. Once I'm totally clear about that, then I'm off and running. So then after that, as long as I kind of have a very clear idea who I want to have books in terms of the couples, and at what point is it going to be so and so's book? You know, is his book going to be book two, or is his book going to be book six? Because if it's book two, he needs to be a lot more present in book one. So people will know him. So when it's time for his book, people can say, oh, yeah, I remember he's great. I really hope he gets together with that one. And then, but if he's book six, then he can be in book one a little bit less because we don't need him for a little while in terms of background where he's really prominent in my readers' minds. So uh, that's why I think I write longhand before I start typing because I can really get the relationships down when I write it, when I physically write it. It's much clearer to me. So, yeah, there is a lot of percolating, a lot of thinking, a lot of planning, and a lot of big picture, which I then squeeze down into small incremental steps, which are actually books, because I know where I want to begin and I know where I want to end, and how am I going to get all my people there in between in 8 books with a love story for each each book,
Hmm.
which has to advance the plot in every single way towards where I want this whole thing to go. So it's actually a lot more complicated than I think people think it is. When you write a standalone book, it's kind of done, but when you write a whole series, it has to make sense from beginning to end.
Do you find yourself when you're working on one book, then thinking, well, this is a good idea for this book down the road, and then you have to write a scene or two of that, or at least a couple notes or lines?
Yeah.
How many books are you working on at once?
Well, right now I'm writing the fifth book in a series, and I plan for it to be a 10-book series in total. But I just finished the fourth book. I just published it a month ago. And I introduced a little hint in the fourth book that will not make sense to my readers until the sixth book. But it's interesting because somebody picked up on it. One of my readers sent me a message on Facebook saying, "Oh my God, who is Cole's ex-wife? Have we met her?" And I thought, that's you're so smart, because it was just a little one line about
Hmm.
things that Cole loves, and the only thing he loved more than his ex-wife and air and cigarettes was teasing people. And somehow she picked up on it. She said, "Wait, have we met the ex-wife?" And I wrote her back. I said, "No, we haven't, but she'll be really important soon." So, I've already in my mind, I've written book 6. I already know what is happening in that book, and that's why I introduced her 2 books previous. But just really, if you didn't catch it, it wouldn't change a thing about book 4 or 5 or 6. But I like to introduce little things like that, and very often I'll hint at relationships. You'll meet a couple of people in book 2, and I know their book is going to be book 8, and you don't know that yet, but at least they're in the vicinity of each other. They don't know each other. They haven't fallen in love. They barely have a relationship, but I know that that first meeting is important, and it's going to carry up to book 8, which is then going to be their book where they fall in love. So there's a lot of foreshadowing and laying the groundwork of all my relationships for the whole series, starting in book 1 and carrying on consistently, so that when the relationship happens, I don't want my readers to think, well, that's not possible. Like they have to say, oh yeah, okay, that makes sense. I can see why they're falling for each other. I get that. I didn't really see it coming, but I get it. Yeah, okay. So every once in a while, I'd like to surprise people with a bit of a shocking relationship that maybe they didn't see coming, or but if they look back on the whole series and they go, you know what, yeah, yeah, actually that is logical. So I
Yeah,
like to
it's
have
that
fun with that.
that built-in hindsight makes it much more interesting to write and to read. I've
Yeah.
done a few series, and it's you start with whatever one you start with, and then you go either from the future of that or before that. And if you have a series that deals with some sort of time travel or memories or flashbacks, that makes it more complicated. So it's one of
Mm,
those where once you start writing a series, for me, you have to keep going, because if you don't, you forget all those little connections yourself, and then you have to go back and read everything again. But
yeah.
I try to do the series where a person can pick up any book in the series and start reading it, and it's an okay standalone story. But when you start putting it together with the other ones, you can see that it's a piece of a larger puzzle. And as you get farther back from the picture, you see all the connections, and
Mm.
it makes it exciting to write and hopefully exciting to read. But how do you approach it book by book in your series? Are you looking to where you should definitely read the first book first and then go from there? Or could somebody pick up the fourth book, understand it enough, and then go back and read the first one and go, oh, this is really tying in well?
It depends on the series. In the case of the Open Skies series, which is my sexy cowboys on a ranch under the Rockies in Colorado, I
Nice.
think you could probably pick up any of the books except book 5, which is the last book in the series. I think you could pick up books 1 to 4, read them as a standalone, and then double back. Um, and then my Fighting for Love series, probably the same, also 5 books. I think if you read books 1 to 4 in any particular order, it wouldn't matter, but you couldn't read the 5th book and try to work your way back. That's too much. I
Mhm.
think just because it's the last book and everything gets tied up, you're kind of, I mean, you could, but you're kind of spoiling it for yourself. Then you wouldn't really enjoy books 1 to 4, I suppose. Having said that, my other 2, well, 3 big series, which is the Unseen Enemy series, which is 8 books, my Dangerous Curve series, which is 8 books, and the Motorcycle Club series that I write, The Road Devils MC, which is the one I'm writing the 5th book now. I don't I wouldn't recommend reading those out of order because they are 8 books, and the series I'm working on now is gonna be 10 books, and it's just too complex in terms of the storytelling. And I think they would be great as standalone books, but I don't think that people would fully get what's happening or appreciate sort of what's going on because I don't just carry the characters through the entire series. Like I said, I have these threads that I carry through the entire series, and if you kind of grab on the thread halfway through, you're not going to really understand what's going on. And these 3 series, are more about the military, bodyguards, motorcycle clubs, and these 3 series are actually really interconnected. So the characters jump around between the 3 series. The
Uh,
other 2, the 5 books, they pop in and out, but it's not as much. These 3 series are so interconnected that I think if you read any, you could start with any of the 3 series, book 1, read it through, pick up any of the other 2 in any order, in terms of the series, and it would all make sense together, all 3 of them. But if you tried to read a book from one series, then a book from the other series, and then over here, and then double back, I think you would just be a confused mess, honestly, because the characters are so interconnected that you would think, no, 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 he's not married to her. Like he's just come back from Afghanistan, and you've missed the whole story of his relationship with his wife. So it wouldn't work in that case. I think it really depends which series we're talking about.
One of the things that helps me keep track, whether I'm reading a book or writing it, is a timeline. And I wish I
Mm,
knew I wish I thought about that concept more even as a kid learning things. Like if you
Mm,
started writing a timeline from first grade on when you were taking history classes or any type of class, and I imagine it as a wall and you're writing your basic timeline on there, just the numbers, and then you're plugging all these things in to see how they fit together. And when I'm reading a book, I find it's easier to keep track of it that way. And I take notes, probably too many notes when I'm reading a book, just because when you start writing, you see those little things like the guy's ex-wife, where you go, well, that's in there for a reason. I know it's in there
mhm,
for a reason because
mhm,
I wouldn't put it in there unless it had a reason. So
uh-huh,
it's those things that you can keep track of, and then just being used to doing it when I'm writing or thinking about a book I'm writing that hasn't been it's not in words yet, but you're trying to figure it out what's going on, is the timeline is pretty great. And then when I was teaching some law enforcement classes, I did a timeline from like 1800s to the present time, and I first put in the world wars, and then US wars, and then other wars at the time, and you get this better picture that's when I was like, man, I wish I knew this when I was a kid, because everything would tie in so much nicer. Like you go, oh, that's when prohibition was happening, and then this war happened, and then at the same time in the world this stuff was going on, and then during the revolution, Napoleon doing the American Revolution, Napoleon's around doing things in Europe, and you're like, wow, I didn't put this together in all those classes
mhm,
growing up, and I wish my mind would work differently if I had. I think so.
mhm.
I can
It's one of the great
appreciate the
things
timelines.
about well, it's one of the great things about traveling, but also I've never just traveled. I've always lived overseas. I mean, I left Canada, 25 years ago. So I've lived more than half my life outside of my country of birth at this point. So I lived in Asia for 6 years. I lived in Poland for 20 years. Um, no, that's not right. No, Poland for a total of
16.
16 years. Yeah. And I've lived in England now for 5 years. So, one of the great things, especially about Poland, because I was there for so long, was learning about Polish history and then remembering sort of what I learned about the Second World War, for example, when I
Mm.
was a student in Canada. And then, of course, uh, communism and then the fall of communism. I remember watching all these things on television. I studied Eastern European politics at school. So I learned all about the Prague Springs. I learned all about like Walesa and Solidarity. I learned all these things. But then when I was in Eastern Europe, it has a whole different meaning when you're walking through downtown Warsaw to go somewhere, and they have these lines in the middle of the concrete right downtown Warsaw in the banking district. And it's a huge line, and it just says, this was the wall of the Jewish ghetto. So as
Mm.
soon as you step over that line, you are in what used to be the ghetto, where they herded all the Jewish people and kept them there. And basically, that's where that was the holding place until it was time to take them off to Auschwitz, or this is known as Auschwitz or Birkenau. They were put on a train and sent elsewhere. So the second you walk over that line, you're in the ghetto. And now it's cafes, there's a Starbucks, there's a high end hotel, the Intercontinental is there, but, 60 years ago, it was devastation, and being in that every single day is absolutely amazing, and it gives you this you have these moments, I think, like, kind of what you talk about where you go, "Oh, the connection. Oh, I read about that, and now I'm walking in it." And there's something so amazing about that that something that you learned or you read about or you saw on television, and then there it is, you're in it, and suddenly your brain goes, "Oh God, yeah, that all makes sense now." I felt the same way when I went to Cambodia. I spent years watching documentaries about the temples of Angkor Wat. And every time I thought, "I've got to go there one day," and then I did, and I was standing in the middle of the temples, and it's just totally surreal. It's totally surreal, and everything suddenly clicks into place when you think about Pol Pot and what happened to the Khmer people in Cambodia, and then you're in it. It changes everything. It changes everything, and I think that's something that maybe, I need to get back to traveling because I'm missing those. I'm only having those experiences virtually now. I'm not experiencing them in person anymore. And I think it's such an important part of inhabiting this planet is making those connections.
Do you think that places having feelings like that is because of what we know, or do you think the place has a memory of its own?
It's interesting you ask that because I've always believed that places have memories, but I've always been told that was fanciful, or and oh, it's just the writer in her. She's just got a romantic sort of dramatic spirit. But you can't go someplace like Cambodia, for example. You can't go to the killing fields and not feel something. And it's partly because you know what happened there, of course. I mean, you should do some reading and be up on your history, at least pay the place that much respect. But it's just some places just feel horrible. Like when I went to Auschwitz, and I was there, you walk through that place and no, it definitely has a memory. It has a somber, heavy feel, and there have been a few places in my life, in my travels I've gone to, where even if I didn't sort of know what had happened there to the extent that I did, that they're sad places with heavy, heavy hearts, and I really believe that. And call me a fanciful writer, but I believe it's true.
Where do you think that ideas come from then? Do you think it's
Ideas?
Yep. Do you think it's something that is just from our own experiences and we manifest within ourselves? Or do you think it's coming from somewhere else, like we're an antenna for it or something different?
I suppose it depends who you would ask. My grandmother was extremely religious, and she always told me that all of my ideas came from something above myself, something higher than myself. She believed that my ideas were not holy exactly or sacred, but they were inspired. That's what she believed. My mother was very spiritual, but not so much religious. So she believed that any of my creative ideas came from the earth or nature or something, the wind whispering. This was her belief that there was a
Mhm.
greater universal. Mm, there's an actor at play or a series of actors at play. Um, then, if you were to ask me when I was a younger woman and I was fleeing anything to do with religion or spirituality, I would say that those ideas came from me just walking around the world and being observant, that I was just reading something, hearing something, talking to someone in a bar, and something happened and they said something and I had an idea pop into my head. So I would say that I was self-absorbed and arrogant enough to say that all of my ideas came from my direct experience, so it was all down to me. Um, Now, at the age that I am, and being the mother of two, and having lived and traveled as much as I have, and having a whole new appreciation for my mother and my grandmother, I would honestly say that my ideas come from uh, they come from my direct experiences, definitely. But sometimes, every once in a while, I'll have a dream, and that will be something I write about. So where does a dream come from? I don't know. I don't know. Sometimes I hear my mother or my grandmother speaking to me, and is that a memory or is that something where I'm getting some kind of divine prompt? I don't know. But What I do know is my best ideas come from something beyond myself. They don't just come from me and my direct experience. They come from something else. And I don't know what that something else is. That's a whole theological conversation that I don't even know where to begin with. But my best ideas feel inspired, not experienced, if that makes any sense.
Yeah. Yeah. I can tell in writing when it's me writing and when it's something else.
Mm,
And mainly it's in poetry. Sometimes you get it in just regular novel writing, or when you get an idea and it matches up so well with something else, that seems like it seems bigger than I'm able to connect. So it must be something that's already out there that's just being revealed. And I'm just the one that is having that perspective of it. I
mhm,
think that sounds like with your grandmother and your mother that those things could both be explained as being part of the same thing, that they're just
mhm,
expressing it in different ways. And if we are channeling something that sounds, if something is like communicating through us, then there has to be a way to communicate. So there has to be some sort of something you understand, and that's your experiences. So
mhm,
you experience things and now you can understand feelings or ideas that something grander than you is trying to explain through this much more narrow understanding. Like the
mhm,
understanding of a human has to be more narrow than whatever else is out there.
mhm,
And then you just have all the living things that are around us too, like, the trees, the animals, all those other things, and they have their own stuff going on in their lives too.
mhm.
That's that part that travel, I think, opens your eyes to where there's a lot more going on in the world than I can ever imagine. So
Or
it's
experience or
yeah,
experience directly. Mm,
that's the great part about it. Maybe when you're younger, or maybe it doesn't have to do with age, maybe it's just understanding, which is probably close to tied to age, that you're just dealing with what's in your immediate reach versus understanding what else is outside of you. And I'm not sure when that changed for me, or when I had that larger realization of it, of where you're worried about more than just yourself. But if we're ever worried about more than just ourselves, I guess we can be. I mean, it comes down to, you make that decision every day that you're going to keep continuing to live, whether you understand you've made that decision or not. Everything is making that decision of
mhm,
give up or continue. But
mhm.
it's interesting in books and in writing when you have a story that you're just like, I wonder where that came from, or a character says something that you're like, I didn't realize that this character would say that, or the opposite, where you try to make a character do something and it doesn't seem right.
God, yeah. Yeah. My 4th book, the one that I just published, it took me a while to publish it for a few different reasons, but there was this one character that was fighting me every step of the way. Like, I had written his story. I knew exactly what he was supposed to do. I had written it out longhand. I had typed it into Milanote, and I was off. And this guy was such a jerk. Like, really, he was such a jerk. And I thought, would you stop fighting me? So finally I thought, okay, 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 okay. And in the end, in the end, anyway, I don't want to tell you what happened to him, but he kind of he was his own worst enemy. Let's put it that way. And I just thought, well, that's what you get. You know? I wanted this whole other story for you, but you insisted on going down this path, and now here we are. So that is something that I understand. And every once in a while, the
Hmm.
characters will fight me. I'll want them to behave a certain way in a scene, and they'll do the exact opposite of what I want them to do, and they'll huff off, and I'll think, okay, well, I guess I've just pushed your book with him 2 books into the future because he's not gonna forgive you in time for the next book that was supposed to be your book. So now I'd better rethink this slightly. So there's a lot of rewriting that goes on, not replanning that goes on
Mhm.
based on how my characters behave. And most of them are very they stick with the program, they got the script, they're good, but I get the occasional sort of rogue character who, changes things, I have to say, for the better, to be fair. They know what they're doing better than I do sometimes. So I do know what you mean about characters kind of having minds of their own a little bit sometimes.
Yeah, that's a good I think that's points towards good character development when
Mm,
you don't have control of the character. And I think if you go with the religion standpoint of it and free will and everything, that you get a little insight into what it's like if there's a God that created everything that's out there just watching, then that's what it's like when you write a character and the character's like, nah, that's that. I'm gonna do this other thing. And you're like, all right, look, I don't want you to do that. I'm gonna put this here for you in case you want to come back to this side of things, but you're gonna keep going that way. So there it is. You're just it's just gonna happen. So
It's
I don't
true.
know.
I mean, as the writers, we think we're the creators, we think we're in charge, and we are for the most part. But every once in a while, they kind of defy you a little bit, and you're like, okay, fine. Like you're like a parent going, fine, do what you want, see how it turns out for you. And then they come back at the end of the book and they go, see how much better that is? And you think, okay, you're right. So you have to loosen the control just a little bit, but they cannot run amok because then you have no idea what's going on.
Mm,
I suppose in a standalone book, it wouldn't be so bad because you might end up with something very surprising. But in a series, if you're on book four of a 10-book series and you've got somebody who's being really stubborn, you're thinking to yourself, listen, you're screwing up not just this book, you're screwing up 6 books. Please stop.
mm.
That's where a little bit of flexibility is probably required.
How often during a regular day do you take notes about like a little note here or there? You're in the store, you're waiting
Mm,
somewhere that you're like, oh, this thought occurs to you and you
mhm.
have to write it down, whether it's a large paragraph of ideas or just a line of a character.
Oh, I should show you my stack of notebooks over here. I've got the one that I showed you where I've got that's kind of my longhand journal where once I've gathered all my little notes that I've written during my day and before I go to bed at night. I mean, I'm never without a notebook. If I go to the kitchen to make a cup of coffee, I bring my notebook with me. If I go upstairs to read a little bit, I have a notebook on the bed next to me, you know? So constantly, constantly. But it is more about where I put the notes. So I have like very small, tiny little notebooks that are more for taking out with me and just scrawling ideas, just random things. I'll be sitting on the tram going to the center to grab a cup of coffee from Starbucks with a friend. And then I'll see somebody and I'll think, oh my God, my character, that's what my character looks like. Look how that person's moving. And I'll make a quick note, pop it into
Mm,
my purse, get on with my day. Then I have bigger notebooks, like something like, okay, I'll show you which this one is more for, you can see the size of this one. It's more for detailed observations, or I'll maybe write a few sentences of dialogue that's really important, like an idea, this person really needs to say this. I'll write that down, and that's where that goes. And then I have this one, which is a thicker book, as you can
mm,
see. It's almost a novel size. And that's where I'll actually cut out pictures or I'll find pictures. That's my visual book. Or I'll draw things in this one, for example. I'll show you. Like I do a lot of visuals in this one. Uh, oh, like for example, something like that. Like I'll
mm.
literally draw a picture, I'll find a picture. That's my visual book. And then the one I showed you, where once everything's kind of pulled together, I know my characters look like, I know how they're gonna move. I've got a feeling based on an image that I drew or I found, and I've got dialogue. Then I put it all into the book I showed you originally, where everything is written longhand, chapter by chapter by chapter. And once I'm happy with that, then it goes onto the computer. So, I mean, some people might say that's scatty or disorganized, but for me, it really works because I have my concepts organized by place, and then I pull them all together. And then once they're pulled all together, then I put it on the computer and then I'm ready to go. So there's a lot of musing and ruminating and observing, and a lot of stuff that I write I never use, but it's all part of the process. It's like alchemy, right? You have to distill. You've got to go through all the dross to get the gold. So I do a lot of my alchemy is just writing, 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 and then I'll take my highlighter and I'll highlight the nugget of gold and say, okay, that's actually what I was getting at. I will use that. And once I have all my highlighted sections, that's what I put into my longhand notebook, and that's what I use to base my writing, like the actual writing, not just the thinking about the writing. So yeah, it's I've never actually really talked about it. It probably sounds more complicated than it actually is. For me, it's about feeling or concept as opposed to um, you know, having everything kind of spread out that way really works for me, but I have to be able to pull it together in some cohesive way, or it would just be a disaster. Did
Yeah,
any of
or
that make any sense
it
now
it
that I think
did.
about it?
It
Okay.
did. Organization is key, and I think that's the difference between a writer and not a writer is number one, a writer writes. So you have to be able to have the thought and then have enough of whatever it takes to write it down. And then after that, put it somewhere where it's organized and then organize it into a larger story and put all those thoughts together. And I think that's why more people don't write books is because it has all those little steps along the way. But if you learn what works for you,
Mm.
then it makes it easier. How long did it take for you to get to the point where you're at this level of organization?
This system, as I should call it,
Mm.
probably, I think the first time I ever did this properly, like the way that I have it now, divided into sort of concept notebooks, it would have been what, 8 years ago, maybe? And I've been writing professionally one way or the other since I was about, I mean, about 8 years ago, I came up with a system. I've probably been writing professionally as a magazine journalist, and then as an editor-in-chief of a magazine, and then this kind of thing for about 20 years. So it's, in the grand scheme of things, probably about half the time that I've been writing properly. But like I said, I've wanted to be a writer for as long as I can remember, since I was about 9 years old. So it is a very recent system, and it is something that, I kind of flirted with for a while. I've always had a notebook for ideas, like an ideas notebook, but there was only one, and everything was kind of mashed into one place. And in a weird way, that was harder to parse out and figure out than the way I have it, where I've got all my stuff in 3 or 4 different places. So it's I don't know if it's a great system, but it works for me.
Yeah, I think that's the key. It's got to work for you. And one of the best parts of writing I found is it teaches you how to think. So whether you're in school writing a paper or whether you're writing a book, it's you've got to organize your thoughts somehow. And as I said before, some people are better at it than others. They practice it more. And hearing that out of a 20-year career, it was only 8 years ago that you've gotten to the system where you are now. And it'll probably change outside of that too as things go on. But that's that's the big part of writing is for me is finding how to organize all those things so you can think about what you want to think about when you want to.
Yeah.
Otherwise, it's just so much noise from so many different ideas, so many different characters, so many different things that it's
Mhm.
difficult to separate that mountain of information like it's all in one notebook. It's all in your head. You got to get it out. And for me, that's how stories present themselves too, is you have them in your head, you're thinking about it, whether you're listening to music and thinking about it or going for a walk or working out or doing some sort of more menial task and you're thinking about that while you're doing it, eventually it gets to the point where that story wants to come out and you have
Mhm.
no choice but to write it because that's all you're thinking about. And then once you get it something out, it's maybe not complete, but you get into the realm of something on paper, and you can free up that space in your mind, then you can think
Mhm.
about other things.
Mhm.
I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I think my favorite notebook is probably this one, which is my dialogue notebook.
Mm,
And it's just if I look at it sometimes and it's just like slews of dialogue just written. I put the quotation marks, I put the commas, I put the question marks. It's all
mhm.
done properly. But every once in a while, I look through it and I have a hard time remembering who said that. I mean, I know used it because it's highlighted in orange, which means it was an important
Okay.
enough quotation that it's in one of my books. It's a line of dialogue or even a whole paragraph. Every once in a while, I think, who is that? um, but it's one of my favorite notebooks because it has no context. If somebody were to pick that up and look at it, they would think that I was having endless conversations with myself that are disjointed and make no sense. They make complete sense to me. It's just I can't always quite remember. All I know is I loved it enough to put it in the book and use it. So it's yeah, it's a strange system. It really is, I think,
That
but
would be really exciting for a person that was into all those stories to be able to look at that and go, "Oh, wow, look at how this matched up, and this is a little different than it was before." Like the lady that picked up on the, ex-husband thing, where
yeah, yeah.
she would appreciate a book like that. I think that's the fans that are really into it, and it's not I don't know if I would say they're into the writer. I think they're into the story. And then
Mm,
that's why they're interested in things like that. And it's key on that organization to be able to show when you used it and when you haven't, because you can
mhm,
really mess things up not keeping
mhm,
track of that. And then you go
mhm,
crazy going, I know I've used this line, but I don't know where. And if you
mhm,
want to reuse it again, just for fun, that's okay. But if you're reusing it because you didn't keep track of where you used it before, that seems a little more sloppy. I don't know. But
mhm, mhm.
it's yeah, getting the system down is hmm, it's key. So then we've talked about the areas you write and how you write. When you are focusing on doing a book, do you set aside time for it to write, or do you look for a word count, or do you look for covering a topic? How do you get through a book, like keep yourself motivated to keep going forward with it?
I like I said, I discovered Milanote about 8 months ago, and one thing that I love about it is you can color code things. So, I'll have my whole outline typed out based on my written summary of every chapter and little bits of dialogue. I'll put all that in there, and then based on it's actually really helpful to have it on the computer screen because depending how much information is in a chapter, like what has to happen in this chapter, who's in this chapter, what's the pivotal event in this chapter, is there a love scene in this chapter, what are some of the key bits of dialogue in this chapter, I can get some sense of how long that chapter is going to be. In my mind, this isn't a 4-page chapter, it's an 18-page chapter. I know this. It's broken into scenes. There's 3 scenes. And then I've got some quite short chapters. They're just 4 pages of straight, this one thing is happening and that's 4 pages and we're done. So I like Milanote because when I finish a chapter or I finish part of a chapter, I can color code it. I can highlight the card, for example, and then you get this. You sort of like start to see as you scroll down the page and you see it. I use kind of a pink background for a finished chapter, and your screen goes from completely white to little patches of pink here and there, depending what I felt like writing that day, how much time I had. I don't have time for a 20-page thing today. I better stick with the 4-page thing. And then once it's finished, I change the card color to pink. And then it's the pink is everywhere. And then you kind of get down to the last 2 chapters. And I tend to leave the love scene chapters for the end. I write those last. Or I'll write the chapter, but I'll skip the love scene. I'll just write love scene here and carry on writing. So I tend to write my love scenes last because uh, what happens in the love scene is a reflection of what's happening in the relationship. So the love scenes will change over the course of the story, depending what's happening in the relationship with my characters. So when I'm looking at a day, if I have a doctor's appointment, I know I only have 4 hours. I'll pick one of my shorter chapters, or I'll pick a scene that's really important, but I've really nailed it in terms of I really know what's happening in this scene. And then I don't write beginning to end, like chapter 1 to chapter 28. I I don't cherry pick, but I sort of go with what I feel like doing that day or what I have time to do that day. Or things that are really clear in my head, I'll write first because I feel like that sets the tone for all the chapters around it. So it's a little bit scattershot. I realize that. But again, it really works for me. And because I have everything typed out, chapter one to chapter whatever, broken into individual chapters, if I go from chapter 2 to chapter 12 and double back again, I'm really confident. Like I know what's happening between 2 and 12, so I don't need to worry I'm going to mess something up. Um, so again, it's organization, but it sounds disorganized. But I promise you, it's actually very organized writing in sort of a weird way.
Nice. You said before that you self-published on Amazon. Is that the way you've done all of your books?
Yes. I was, like I said, I was a journalist for a while. I was a magazine writer for a while. And then I became editor in chief of the magazine. So that was all very professional, if you want to call it that. I had a name on a masthead and everything. But then my short stories were self published. And then my two longer novels, the ones based in Canada, quite dark, contemporary literature, also self published. So then when I got into romance, it self publishing was easy. And the great thing about Amazon, and I know Amazon is problematic for a lot of different reasons, but it has changed the game for self published writers. And that's a great thing because not everyone is going to get an agent, not everyone's going to get a publishing house, but there are lots of talented writers out there, and they should be able to publish and express themselves. But then you also get a lot of stuff on Amazon that is really, really poor quality. So you can just get lost in the sheer number of books out there. So that's why you have to write well. You just have to write well, and you have to work to get yourself out there. Because once people read a few of your books and they think you're a good writer and you tell some good stories, they're invested in the characters, they'll carry on with you. But it's for me, self-publishing is absolutely such a gift. It means I can be my own boss. I'm my own editor. I'm in total control over what my covers look like. I'm in total control over my publishing schedule. I'm in total control over my promotion, who I talk to, when I do that, if I do that. So it's amazing freedom in that way, and I don't take it for granted for 1 second. It requires a lot of discipline. It really does, and it just really works for me. Are you self-published as well?
Yep. Yeah. Amazon, I really like, and I found it maybe in 2014, a little after 2014. And the first book I published through a self-publishing house. So
Mm.
it's my view on that is the writer is the customer for the
Oh,
self-publishing house, not the
okay.
reader. Like the self-publishing house isn't making it so people can get the book. They're making it so the writer pays them
Um,
to do all these things. And
okay,
I'm glad I had that experience. I wouldn't do one of those places again, especially
okay.
after using Amazon, because Amazon is so great for all those reasons you explained. And Yeah, self-publishing with Amazon is pretty great. I have never had the experience of like a book seller coming to me and saying, "We're going to pay for everything. We're going to give you this money to write a story about this thing, and then you're going to do this, this, and this." You know, we go to these book signings and do all that. So I don't have that experience to say what that's like, but uh, I like the Amazon one and being able to do the cover and all that stuff you explained. That
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
pretty great. It's pretty great.
It's a lot of control at the end. I mean, it's a lot of work and it's a lot of organization. It's a lot of time. It's a lot of behind the scenes stuff. But at the end of the day, if you want to consider yourself a brand, let's say, or you have a certain name and you want to be seen a certain way, like I want to be a romance writer, then you have to decide what that means. And having that control is absolutely amazing. And it's kind of weird because I was approached a few years ago by somebody who wanted to. Um, they wanted me to write faster. Like they wanted me to publish more books. And
Mm,
I'm like, "Well, how? Like, what do you mean?" And this woman said, "Well, I've got this kind of stable of writers, and what they would do is they would read your books. They would sort of lock down on your tone, your style, what sort of words you use, how your characters speak. Like, basically, they would mimic you, right? And all like they would ghostwrite your books. Your name would be on it. We would take a certain percentage to pay the writer or whatever, but you could basically publish a book every 2 weeks with your name on it. I said,
mm,
"But it wouldn't be me." And they're like, "But would the reader know that?" Because they would really, like they would really sound like you. And I thought, "Oh, I just everything about that just meant total loss of control." Just co I wouldn't even be writing my own. They said, "No, you could go back and edit it." And I'm like, "Well, then I might as well write it." You know?
mm,
If I'm gonna have final say over it, I might as well do it in the first place. But they said, "Look," and they showed me some numbers, and they said, "Listen, if you were publishing a book every 2 weeks, this is what we project you could earn. Even with our cut, your income would sort of quadruple." And there is always a part of you that thinks life would be a lot easier with just a little bit more money, you know?
mm.
But that loss of control just did not feel worth it to me. I could not get okay with it. And I said, "No, thank you." And every once in a while since then, when bills have been a little bit tight, I've thought, you know what? I could really use all those royalties right about now. But I know for the sake of my nerves, I would have lost my mind. I would have just been constantly in a state of anxiety about what somebody was writing under my name that
Mm.
I just couldn't handle it, I don't think.
Yeah, it'd be hard to keep track of. And then if anybody ever looked at it and goes, "Hey, this person is writing a book every 2 weeks," they're going to start to get suspicious. For me, the writing is that's the reason I write is for the writing.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
I say that not being a millionaire writer, and I don't have that experience, but it's I think I would still like the idea of sitting down and finding the story, whether it's something, however you develop your stories. I would miss that. So then you wouldn't really be a writer anymore. It's kind
Yeah.
of those days where people, or people say, "What do you do for a living?" And then you have to think, well, if I wrote today, I feel like a writer. So I'm going to
Uh-huh.
need to write every day. And
Yeah.
if I'm going to write every day, I might as well have something to show for it. So I might as well write a book. So then
Mhm.
that's even if nobody ever bought it, it would be nice if people buy it. If nobody ever bought it, I would still write, I think.
Mhm. No, I agree with you. And it's kind of interesting that you said that about the experience of the writing because I all my books were ebooks only originally, and right now I'm in the process of converting all of my ebooks to print books, and they should all 31 books should be in print by Christmas time. So it's meant that I've had to convert all my books from ebook to print because it's a whole different program. And of
Yep.
course, then the spacing changes. So I'm rereading all my books in print format right now and making corrections and moving stuff around or whatever. So it means I've had to reread 30 of my books. And I have to honestly say that there is so much pride in reading 30 books and knowing that every word in between those pages were my words. I chose it, I put it there, I kept it there, it survived the editing process. I stand by these words. And I yeah, I take great pride in what I do. And I'm finally at the point in my life where if someone says to me, "So what do you do?" I can say, "I'm a writer." um, and I can mean it. And there's even been a few times when I've been rereading my books, I've kind of been moved to tears. And I thought, oh, that really is a lovely scene. I really did that one. I really did that one well. So I look forward to nothing more than carrying on writing. It's one of those jobs you can do, I can do for another 30 years easily. And I just enjoy it. Enjoy. I mean, sometimes it's really hard work and I write it and I hate it and I delete 4 pages and I'm like, ugh. But everything I delete is one step closer to something that I'm going to keep. So even that's really valuable.
Yeah, it's the process. It's that thing the process is what you're searching for to be able to do it, but that's the adventure of it is developing that works for you and then seeing it work.
Hmm.
The you have the ebooks and now the print copy. You did some audiobooks as well,
Yes,
right?
yes. One of my series is on audiobooks. Yes.
How did you approach that process?
I didn't actually do the audiobooks. I hired a professional voice person. She's actually a professional American actress. Have you seen London Has Fallen, the Gerald Butler movie?
I have seen the previews.
Okay. Well, there's a what?
I know of the movie.
There's there's like the White House has fallen or whatever that's
Hmm.
called, and then there's Olympus has fallen, and then there's London has fallen, and there's Angel has fallen. Well, this was the second one. She was one of the characters in this movie. She was the German
Okay.
chancellor. So she was my voice actress. So I was living in Poland at the time, and I was flying from Warsaw to London for about 2 months to supervise the voice recording in the studio, but I didn't actually do the reading. I hired a professional actress to do it. So she's the one on the audiobooks. And that was an amazing experience because writing is a very quiet. I don't read my stuff aloud to myself ever.
Mm.
I everything's in my head. And to hear my words spoken aloud by someone who was professional and used different voices and cadences for each character and who brought emotion. I mean, she was acting with her voice. It was amazing to experience. And it was like watching a play in a strange way, or like radio. I used to listen to the radio when I was younger and listen to theater on the radio. And it was kind of like that. It was kind of an out of body experience to hear my words spoken. And again, it was something that I felt incredibly proud about, that my words, my written words, held up under that type of situation. You know, a single voice reading them out loud for 2 months solid, 8 books, and it held up from beginning to end. And I thought, wow, that was an amazing experience to hear my books, not just see them or write them. It was a whole different way to experience something I had written. And yeah, I really enjoyed it. I mean, the sex scenes were a little bit much. I have to admit, there were a couple of times where I was like, wow, I was blushing a little bit. But yeah, she was amazing. Very, very talented woman.
Nice. I would think if you have a scene you like that you wrote, maybe read that out loud and see how it goes.
Do
Because
you think so?
Yeah,
Oh, do you do
it
that?
sounds different. With poetry, maybe more,
Yeah.
and I read it to my dog a lot, so
Oh.
the dog knows the poetry, but I think that's where I'm more at awe of it. I wouldn't say, like, the work, I wouldn't put it in the category of proud. I'm not I wouldn't try to hide it, but it's more of just more in awe of it, because with poetry, I feel like more of the conduit for some message from somewhere else, and it's
Mm,
stranger free verse type stuff, and you read it, and I can remember the emotion when I wrote it down, and I can feel it again when I read it or hear it. And then there are times where you come back to it sometime later, and it seems like it has a different meaning to you. And I know from other people reading it that it has different meanings to them. And I was like, wow, that's pretty great that that occurs. And that's
mhm,
why I think that's why I write poetry and why I read poetry. But yeah, I would try reading that out loud. Like, even if it's not your own, if it's someone else's, that it has that auditory certain something. I don't know. I think
mhm,
it's worth
mhm. I mean, I remember when I was very young and I was writing in English class, one of my teachers told my parents that, um, I'm a lyrical writer. Like, it's musical. It's got a thread through it, and the pacing of my writing, and just the use of long sentences and then short sentences, and
it.
I just instinctively knew that writing was like music. I'm not a musician at all. I'm not musical at all, but I am lyrical when it comes to my writing, much more so than my speaking. So my writing can be very clear, like very crisp, or it can be very flowy and flowery, or it can be sort of musing. And I've always just thought that that was the amazing thing about writing is it has not a soul exactly, but it certainly has emotion in it, definitely. And I've always thought, I wonder if my writing would stand up to being read because speaking it is different. And what I discovered with Nancy reading my books out loud in that studio, they do stand up to being read aloud. So I think that's why I take pride in it because I feel like the fourth grade teacher saw something that I didn't see until a couple of years ago when I was in the studio. She knew already, but now I know as well. So now when I write, um, and I have the sense that this has to be a paragraph that just has this certain rush to it. I just let it happen. I don't try to over edit or worry too much about it. I guess since hearing my books read out loud, I trust my I trust my writing more than I did before I heard it out loud. Now I know it stands up. So I'm really happy about that because that could have been a disaster. It could have been a disaster to have it read out loud.
Nice. Well, what's the best way for people to follow your work and see what's going on?
The best place is everything is through my website right now, which is marysoljames.com. If you go on there, you'll see all of my book series and broken into the 6 series. And then you just choose which book you want, and it will take you to Amazon. Um, and my audiobooks are on there as well. It's the Unseen Enemy series. So if you click on that series, it will take you to the audiobooks on Amazon as well.
Nice.
And right now, I just started a YouTube channel because my son is doing videos of my series for me. He's a film student, like I said, so he's doing some promotional videos. So I'm putting those up on YouTube. My son has dragged me into TikTok. He keeps telling me I have to be on TikTok. So I've
Hmm.
just started a TikTok channel. I'm on Facebook and I'm on Instagram. And the Instagram and Facebook links are on my website, but TikTok
Okay.
and YouTube are not yet because they're so new. I only started them in the past 3 days or something. So that will be on the website. So probably the best place is the website. And then the second best place would be my Facebook page, which is my most active social media right now.
Okay. I have those links in the show notes. So if people
Okay.
want to check them out there, they can. It's pretty great. Is there anything that you wanted to talk about that we didn't, or any thoughts you have in closing?
No, except to tell you that I've been doing a few podcasts because apparently podcasts are the way to go now, TikTok and podcasts. And this was the most thoughtful in terms of the questioning about the process and the inspiration. I mean, most people kind of want to hear they want to hear about my notebook and then Milanote, and that's all they really want to hear about. But I really appreciated the chance to talk more about my disorganized organization.
Yeah, it's a good system.
I've never spoken out loud about it, and it caught me by surprise that you were interested about it because for me, it's just kind of how I do things. So I actually just I appreciate the questions you asked. They were incredibly thoughtful and thought provoking. So thank you.
No problem. Thank you very much for your time. There's often when I sit down to write and then I'll look at YouTube and go, well, let me just look at a few of these videos about authors' spaces and where they write. And it turns into, it could turn into an hour of just looking at this is where I write. These are my books that I do this and
Hmm.
all that, and just seeing those different things and then wondering more. A lot of there's the Masters series or something like that on YouTube that has famous writers that talk about their process. That's
Hmm.
really interesting because then you can look at those and go, oh, that's I kind of do that, or I've tried that and that doesn't work. So there's
Hmm.
definitely different things that work for different people. But yeah, those are interesting things. And then creativity in general is just interesting to think about. So
Hmm.
I
I agree,
appreciate
and
your time.
it looks so different for everybody. I mean, at the end of the day, I'm just one of a million romance writers publishing on Amazon, but I would be willing to bet that each one of us million romance writers do things a little bit differently. And the end result is the same. We publish a romance book. But how we got there is so individual and unique. It's almost like a fingerprint, you know, that I think it's just so individual. And I am fascinated to hear how other people write. So I guess I shouldn't be surprised that it's interesting how I write because I'm interested how other people do it, definitely. So yeah, it's an amazing process writing.
Very nice. Well, thank you very much for your time, and I'll
Thank
talk to
you.
you on the other side of this musical exit.
Okay.
All right.